Welcome to the Joy of Connecting, where modern professionals share stories of meaningful connection and how it can increase business success, unlock career growth, and create personal happiness. If you like what you hear today, get even more by following the Joy of Connecting on LinkedIn and subscribing to our newsletter that features tips from experts on how to network and connect with more meaning. Welcome back to the Joy of Connecting. Today's episode is a bit global. You're getting Alaska and Spain. So we're bringing together a seriously global connection as I've got the marvelous guest, Alex Searle. He and I connected pretty much over LinkedIn, but we connected about connection, folks. So I'm bringing it full circle today. Alex is someone who believes deeply in the power of authentic connection and building networks that are really meaningful. And so his expertise as the founder of a community and a movement called Humble Mind, and certainly as a storyteller and as a consultant to folks who are looking to up level in that way, we're thrilled to have him here today. Alex, I'd love you to start by telling us a little bit about what you do for a living, but more importantly, who are you passionate about helping?
Hey, wonderful to be here and lovely to talk to you. I'm sort of a creative person by heart and by trade in so many ways. I come from a family of musicians. My dad is an artist. And so I think that having a kind of a creative eye, an imaginative eye on everything I do has always just come naturally. But I also kind of love working with people. And so often when I introduce myself to people, I'll say I'm an entrepreneur. I've started 4 different businesses. But really my product is not tech or, products, but it's people. I work with people. Yeah. So outside of the Humble Mind community, I work with a lot of startups and scale-ups, often at the founder, CEO, and sort of C-suite level, specifically around product strategy, audience building, and really understanding their own story. I love stories as a medium, as a way of exchanging information, but also making sense of the world. That's what we do. As human beings, we're very good at telling stories. We've been doing it for about 100,000 years anyway. So it's an amazing innate ability to tap into, but it's also a seriously important and often underused resource in business as well, where people can really be getting more from the story they're telling the world about what they do, the value they provide, and why they're different. So I spend a lot of time in that space, understanding the communication and the language of connection around stories and how we build them and how we're ultimately able to, create stories of value in the way that we can impact customers. Because, setting that impression really is the most important thing you can do for your business. So I really love doing that. I love kind of opening people's hearts and imaginations and their minds to that space and what is possible through the power of storytelling and using language and communication in the right way. And then with Humble Mind, I'm, busy building a professional wellness brand, if you want to call it that, where, it really is a movement of celebrating learning and connection, and a space to do all of that in one particular space where career professionals, startup founders, entrepreneurs, business owners can learn through conversation, and they can connect with other people who are like them, and sometimes also connect with people who are not very much like them. Sometimes you can find like-mindedness in people where you didn't expect. And so that's a community, but it's also evolving into so much more as well, which is really exciting.
Obviously, as a community builder, you're focused on the importance of kind of connections within that community, as you mentioned. And as someone who works with all types of entrepreneurs and founders, the business value of connection. You and I have talked a lot about the human value of connection as well, and just how important it is at that kind of fundamental level. Before I ask you to share the specific story that you were going to share with us, I'd love to hear your thoughts just on how that all plays together, kind of that emotional component of connection and what it can really do for us. Because I know you've got some deep thoughts on that.
Yeah. Anything that we do is always going to have connection and engaging with someone else at the heart of it, whether we're selling shoes or insurance, or we're trying to become a better husband, a better father, a better parent, a better friend to someone else. Whatever we're doing, we're always doing it with people in some way. And why I think connection is important, it's not only because of the act of connecting, of being able to build rapport with someone, being able to understand how to be vulnerable and learn to trust and be trusted by someone. There's a whole lot of great stuff around there, but it's what we can do on top of that as a foundation, we can build great businesses. We can start movements. We can move into a space where we're more creative and connected with ourselves as well. There's just so many great things about understanding and being able to have a space for it as well. Connection is also about a vibe, getting the vibe
Yeah.
right, right? It's like
Yes.
chemistry in many ways. I was speaking to someone yesterday about it, and, chemistry plays a big part of it. And sometimes you kind of hit it off with someone, whether it's romantic or as a friend or whatever it might be. But there are certain conditions, there's an environment within which those kinds of connection catalysts can happen more easily. They can take place, they can emerge more
Hmm.
easily. And it starts with being able to notice and understand this sort of the language of connection and know where that comes
Mm.
from. Connection is also really important component in great leadership as well, because often, leadership or leadership sort of development is really ultimately focused on getting people to become better managers and sort of
Hmm.
organizers of tasks. And that's important because we've got to learn to organize ourselves and organize the structure around us. But without connection, we can't actually be in a space where we can actually really sort of lead a team or get them to be bigger than the sum of their parts, where we can inspire action or motivate someone to, push themselves a little harder. And, oh, okay, I didn't know I had that. Great. You've inspired me as a leader because you took the time to connect with me on a personal
Hmm.
level. Connection always happens at a personal level.
I love the specific application of it. The, obviously within business, as we've talked about, but I love the specific application of it to leadership. You're right. There's, a leader and an unsavvy leader would think I'm the leader. I push things out. Everybody follows. But we all know from relationships to the army to business, that's not how it works, right? Like you have to have those bonds that bring
Mm.
people along. So powerful. Well, I know today I asked you to come kind of ready to share a story about a time when connection, either drove business growth or helped someone with their career. What story would you like to share with us about kind of connection and how you've seen it really be powerful?
I mean, there's been so many moments, but something that happened weirdly enough this week was someone reached out to me. We were actually in conversation, and it's a friend of mine. And normally we kind of catch up about sort of, often just sort of business stuff. What's on the tabletop today? What are you going through? How can I help? We keep it fairly, not transactional, but because we're friends, but we keep it sort of fairly at a kind of a similar level every time. And he asked me while I was explaining something to him, is this what you want? What does Alex want? He asked me. Is this what you really want to do? And somehow he was able to kind of break through maybe what he saw was me giving him some kind of elaborate answer to a question. I don't really remember what the question was, but he just kind of reached out. And he reached
Yeah.
out without me asking for him to reach out. It wasn't, any other cue where he needed to sort of qualify anything. He just said, is that what you want? And the reason why it kind of stopped me is because for about 30 seconds, I just couldn't say anything. I was
Yeah.
literally, and I'm normally a person who, talks a lot, as you can hear clearly, but I just was sort of floored and I couldn't really, he just had me thinking, and kind of just dropping into the space where I was like, man, yeah, that's probably not what I want. And then we ended up just totally, going in that direction for another hour. We didn't really end up talking about anything else. And why I think that's relevant is because not only at a personal level was that person able to just notice my body language, notice something in the eyes, something that I was saying that kind of gave him the cue to automatically drop into a different level and ask me and kind of reach out at a sort of a heart level, if you like, just checking in, what's really going on underneath here. And it worked. And he was right. His instinct was right. And it ended up being so much more of a meaningful connection and a conversation, which has just given me so much more inspiration on a number of different things that I've since gone on with that I probably wouldn't have explored if he didn't have that moment. And so sometimes connection is a sort of there's a toolkit, you can understand the body language, you can use the words, you can ask the questions, you can do the
Yep.
active listening, you can do all of that stuff. But sometimes it's also totally unscripted and completely natural. It's a sort of a feeling and an instinct that comes up.
Yep.
And he sort of reached out to me in a way that I wasn't expecting. And immediately it made me feel vulnerable, but he also did it in a way that allowed me to explore that vulnerability. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately, I think, what all connection really is about. It's for us
Yeah.
to learn how to drop the walls and drop the defenses. Because when we do, there's a whole lot more information underneath there that we're not
Mhm.
accessing because we're not allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. So the best connection allows us to do that. And when you do that, you develop trust. You develop so many of these other beautiful things, these gifts emerge that otherwise wouldn't be there. Yeah.
Yes, and you find those new paths that open. All of a sudden, the path that you were charging down in that conversation hit a stop sign, and you really thought about it. I mean, even that's maybe not even a good example of communication. I feel like that's the paragon, right? Like that's where we aspire to get to.
Yes.
We talk about approaching any conversation with authenticity. When you have authenticity, you can peel back to that layer. And we talk about listening, right? And he was clearly listening, probably with his eyes
Yeah.
as well as his heart, and he sensed that you weren't giving him the
Yeah.
real Alex. You were giving him the spent too long on LinkedIn Alex or something
Oh
like that.
God.
And we're all there. But boy, is that priceless to have someone who can go to that level of connection.
Yeah.
And it's, that's not always, I'm sure it's happened before. It's probably not a first conversation move, but to find that. And then as you said, there's the connection, but then it's what you build on top of it. So
Yes.
you all of a sudden now have more inspiration,
Mm.
better direction, more clarity.
Mm. Have access
Marvelous.
to each other in that space. It's a space that you can
Yes.
go back into if we need to. It feels like it's
Yeah.
more familiar and comfortable because there's value in it, and we've been there together. And so now
Yes.
it's less spooky and mysterious. Yeah.
Right. The layer's been peeled back. Well, I love what another question that I'd love to ask you is what is one question that you can ask in discussion to really open someone up? And I love that you've already given us one question, which is that really how you feel? Is that where you're really at? I think your friend's question was a perfect one. Do
Mm.
you have another favorite question that if you're on a conversation you found really can peel back that layer or get a little closer to authentic connection?
One that comes to mind right now is a question that I almost always start conversations with, and that is, what's got your attention right now? What's beautiful about it is that it immediately puts the conversation on a different level, which is, not going to be grounded in how was your day, or, the usual kind of call and response stuff that doesn't always offer very imaginative answers, but rather, what's got your attention right now? You're going to be forced to be honest with really what has your attention right now. And if it's something ridiculous and silly, great. Let's start there. If
Yeah.
it's something that's really quite hectic, or maybe, you've just come off a call and it's still on your mind and this has brought up a lot of emotion, or I'm really thinking about it deeply, let's start there. Because you have to
And
follow someone's attention. Attention
mm,
is something that, we all want more of, and it's always sort of difficult to keep. But that's because we're trying to sort of almost create or infringe attention where it's not wanted. Rather, what you've got
mm,
to do is follow where it already is. And when we're able to do that, not only does the person open up because suddenly they've got a lot to talk about, because, okay, if you really want to know, this has my attention and I want to talk about that right now. But it also allows you a way into not only, ask subsequent better questions, but it just allows someone to feel more at ease. So that's always quite powerful. Yeah.
that hits deeply, I think, as well. I've been thinking about attention very much for the last 5 years or so in the businesses I've built and the
Hmm.
work. And I loved your line about you've got to go where their attention is. I think so often in this world, we're trying to take attention or get attention, right? How do
Mm.
I get
Yes.
someone's attention?
Get. Yeah.
Wow, is that thinking about that in a different way? If you're thinking about someone who's earlier in their career, maybe they're just getting started, maybe they're trying to get to a point, especially from a network building standpoint, where they're building connections.
Yeah.
What is a piece of advice you might give someone who's a little bit earlier on and they're still trying to figure out their vibe and figure out how to find these really, powerful connections?
We're often told, be authentic, be authentic. And I mean, good advice. It's well intentioned. But also
Mm.
the problem with it is that just like, be happy, there isn't much of a toolkit behind that. You kind of got to figure out the rest of it on your own. And
Right.
what I've found is that the best sort of advice on how to be authentic is to not actually be or add anything. It's not about kind of being someone, and certainly not being someone else. Rather, it's actually a dropping, it's a subtraction, it's a sort of less show. Because often,
Mhm.
especially when we're in a networking or in a connection context, we're meeting someone for the first time. There's a bit of
Right.
adrenaline, bit of excitement in the air, and we kind of, you want to put your best foot forward. You want to say the right things, and so that can kind of almost get in the way and turn the experience into somewhat of a performance. Not always
Hmm.
intentionally, we don't mean to do that, but we do. We want to put our best impression out there. But I found the very best relationships that I've created, and certainly I've seen this in the work I do, but just also with other people, is that they can get to a sense of clarity in the intention behind what they're doing and being authentic by not trying anything. There's no
Mm,
trying, there's no sort of need to put on a show or to try and be authentic. Like, this is me. I'm being
yeah.
authentic right now, because it's so hard to sort of know how to do that. It's easier to add more layers on than to peel them off. So I think once we sort of flip that around a little bit and think, actually, all you need to be is yourself. But
Yes.
to be yourself, just drop it. It's about dropping and noticing and subtracting the layers, because then not only does someone understand who you are right from the get-go and no one's going to waste their time, but also there's no pretense. You can just
Mhm.
keep on talking in the way that you talk. Yeah. So that's the best way to be authentic, I'd say.
I think it's marvelous. I also think what's lovely about that is when you actually drop the pretense and someone, then when you do make a connection, they're connecting with the real you. They're not connecting with the
Exactly.
show you,
Yeah.
right? They're
Uh,
not connecting with that thing that Alex was heading down on the conversation. They're connecting with the pathway that he took to the right, which is actually the real meat. It's
Absolutely.
beautifully said. One of the things I like to kind of give a little bit of praise to places where you've seen this connection happening really well. So, can you think of a community or a group? It doesn't have to be a formal community, even where you've seen connection done really well. Yeah.
Oh, well, once again, coming back to that sense of a vibe, there's an
Yes.
experience that you're walking into and it feels a certain way. And so Humble Mind definitely, I think, provides that quite well. But looking at other communities, I mean, I've got two in mind quickly. So there's one that comes to mind, another online community called the Conscious Marketing Movement. And that is all about sort of understanding and deepening your understanding of what it means to be a conscious marketer. So looking at, marketing professionals, marketing people to understand how can we be less manipulative in our marketing?
Yeah.
Are we going to use fear-based mechanisms, or are we going to be true to ourselves and then put in the good work? So that's a good
Right.
example and a great
Beautiful.
community to check out too. Then just finally, a completely different group that I'm also very happy to say I'm part of is a group where we practice something called expressive men's work, and using kind of components of storytelling, creativity, a little bit of drama, poetry, allows us to create a space where we have other men who can kind of go quite deep with certain really sort of important questions, especially young men who
Yes.
want to know a bit more about who they are and who they're going to show up as in this world as better fathers, better citizens. And it's kind of in a way of sort of following some of the lost elements of traditional initiations and rites of passage, which I think is a really lost art, because there's a beautiful quote that says, the uninitiated men of the world will be the ones that burn it down. And that's true.
Mm.
We don't
They're not,
need
they
to
don't
look.
feel the connect. They don't have
We,
the connections. They don't.
yeah, and we don't
Wow.
need to look too far in the world to see, a lot of dishonesty and treachery and suffering and alienation, where a whole lot of men,
Yes.
and mostly men and their toys, are kind of
Yes.
driving things in the wrong direction. So there's something in this group and the work that we do to sort of support men, a lot of the time young men, to really kind of get in touch with who they are, to help them
Yeah.
manage powerful feelings and difficult
Hmm.
feelings as well,
Yes.
and provide them with a toolkit and a sense of support, a sense of community, a space to be able to manage these things through feeling them, and then being able to come out back into the wider world with some of their, they can own their shit and
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
understand a bit more about themselves in a really, really, really meaningful way. So yeah, there's so much more
So
I can say about that, but that's a big one as well, and a big influence in my life too.
ah, those are both incredible groups that I think speak to a much deeper need within a group that traditionally, oh, sure, there's men's groups and there's marketer groups, but speak to that much deeper need, much
Yeah.
more meaningful depths of connection. Well, I want to ask you one more before I let you go. And I know you and I could spend hours chatting. So, forever who's listening, believe me, we should probably push record on our other conversations. But I'd love to leave it with who is someone in your mind? You're already a connector. You're an expert at how to think about this, or you wouldn't say an expert, but you say you spend all your time in there thinking about this. Who is someone that you look to as a total connection pro? Someone who is really thinking about connection or networking in a way that inspires you.
There could be many people, but just sort of what's coming to mind now, what has my attention right now, actually is Simon Sinek. He's a great example because he's such a sort of anomaly, isn't he? He's kind of this guy, he had ADHD, and he always says, I've written more books than I've read, and he has his own story where he had to kind of overcome a sense of his own inadequacy in a way because earlier on in his career, 15, 20 years ago, when he came out with some of his first big ideas, start with why I think he pissed off a lot of people with what he was saying and kind of how he was infringing on traditional kind of consultant territory. But he sort of stuck to his own path and has made a phenomenal success. And that's because he's such a great connector. He can kind of reach into people and follow his instinct and ask them a question and let them just be totally safe in feeling vulnerable. He's really good at that, in the way he talks to people. But that's also because he understands that great connectors are also great communicators. And he's certainly an amazing communicator. I mean, he's so articulate and he's just wonderful to listen to. And the way he phrases questions, how unusual, he might say something. The way he might sort of position something and help you articulate your own thought. He does that a lot on his podcast. I just love hearing him talk. And while he does that, while he's communicating, he's connecting. And that's, I think,
Yes.
an important thing to take away, the fact that connection and communication, they're two sides of the same coin. Chances are if you can nail the one, you're probably, a good one of the other too. So that's someone who I look up to, and I'm secretly plotting to have on the Humble Mind podcast at some point. If anyone's got a WhatsApp contact, please make sure you send it to me.
We're going to manifest that. That's
Yes.
happening.
He's a great example. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. I'll make sure. I mean, I think his most recent book really cut to the core of me too. So I'll make sure to link to a few of those for people who haven't read Simon's work. Before I let you go, I'd love for you to just tell our audience, where can they find more of you? Obviously, you've brought up an incredible amount of inspiration for people, but I think some people would also just like to follow what you're doing next. Where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm really active on LinkedIn. I try and keep LinkedIn abreast with my thoughts, my videos on a variety of different topics, from community building to storytelling to leadership, creativity, curiosity. I often talk about that. The best other ways would be to check out Humble Mind and humblemind.co and to join the community on that side if that's of interest. And then also, I suppose, in my kind of more straightforward consulting and storytelling and advisory work, that's alex-searle.com. I've got a newsletter there and some content that I put out there. So yeah, that would be the best way.
I cannot wait to continue the conversation. The way that you think about connection is so inspiring to me. So thank you for sharing it today with everyone on the call.
Thank you. Thank you for creating this beautiful space. And I'm super happy that we got to connect. What a treat.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review to help us reach more listeners. Have a story of your own to share or know someone who should be on the show? Visit www.joyofconnect.ing and let us know. Now go send a short message to someone you've been meaning to connect with. You never know where it might lead.